Hi everybody, welcome to the channel. My name is Valkyrie of Röder. That's Valkyrie of the Veil. That's like the easier English version or translation. Today we're going to be talking about binding up contracts, magically speaking. This video is going to be a part of a blog about power and what is power and why do we try to acquire it and what does that really even mean. Part of that blog is that power for the sake of power is dangerous. It's, I think, pretty interesting as someone who is Scorpio ruled. I have a Scorpio stellium. Plus, it's Scorpio season. Happy Scorpio season, everyone. Oh my goodness. It feels like there's life in the air again. I'm so excited. It feels so good. I'm so grateful for it. Oh my gosh. So if you want the link to that blog or any of the other blogs where I send out updates for the podcast and things of that nature, check it out. Check it out. Check it out. This actually was inspired by a comment that I got on one of my recent videos from natnat_03. Please, can you do a video at some point for those of us who are new to the craft and also to astrology? You talk in some of your blog posts and videos about binding up contracts and so on. Can you give a demonstration, just examples for us of actual tangible practical ways for beginners to do these things, just so we know if we're on the right track? Thank you, with a little heart. And also PS, you look so beautiful. Thank you so much. I'm so grateful for your words. So yeah, let's talk about it. One of the things before we get into the practical application of contracts and binding up contracts, something to just be aware of is that everyone is going to look at contracts differently. Everyone is going to bind up those contracts differently. So I'll give some pretty general, vague starting points for people of what that can look like and why people would do that, and also go into why it's connected to our power exchanges and why I even mentioned the blog at the beginning. So I want to give some astrological placements and spaces for you to look at and go and study if you want to learn about how you bind up contracts, because one of the things about contracts is that there's always something hidden, and that is very protective if you allow it to be, and if you are unprepared, it can be very destructive and not so protective. And it kind of sucks when that happens. So let's talk about the astrology placements then. Anything Scorpio, anything Scorpio, anything Scorpio, anything Scorpio in your chart is going to be contractually bound to power. So what do I even mean by that? Contractually bound to power. You're always going to be in a power position in that placement, meaning people look at you and want that power from you. And you're also looking to the external world asking, how can I gain more of this power? So Scorpio placements, something to look at for that. So you had a Mercury in Scorpio. Those draw out the secrets and the power of other people via words and communication, but it also means that people are going to look at you and your words and ask to have the power that you have. One thing about power is that we can't have the power of another person, and asking for the power that another person has is actually a really, really dangerous art and a really, really dangerous craft. You don't know what that person has had to go through for what they have. You don't know what they have exchanged and offered within their contract of power for what they have. So as just a precautionary note, you can look at examples of what other people have, and you can look at examples of the way that other people live. But the moment that you start to say, I want that quality that they have, I want that lifestyle that they have, I want that thing that they have, the moment you start to do that, correct yourself. Catch it, clock it, lock it. Why do I feel that way? What is it about that person that makes me feel like that? What is it that I can do within myself? Why do I want that power? Because if you ask that question, why do I want that power? What is it about that that's attractive or alluring to me? And explore it instead of asking for that specific thing. So precautionary note. So check out your Scorpio placements first. You also want to, in the discernment of those Scorpio placements, look at your Mars placement. That's going to be how you strategize in your contracts. Well, how do you keep priority in your contracts? And we'll get more into the actual contract structure in a moment. But look at your Mars. That's going to be how you prioritize, how you strategize, also how you claim victory. And it's going to show you if there were to be any place where enemies could come through or where enemies are attracted to you, Mars is going to let you know that too. Mars in the chart is going to be a place of retreat also. So if you find yourself in a space where there could be, you're under attack somehow, or things need to be reorganized, reprioritized, you need to retreat, you need to rethink about stuff, you need to go check out the Mars placement for that. The other placement, and no matter what sort of contract binding you are doing, I recommend going and studying this in your chart. Pluto is the ruler, one of the rulers of Scorpio. Check out your Pluto. Go study, go look at your Pluto, study your Pluto, become friends with your Pluto if you're wondering about power exchanges and contractual bindings within a magical practice. Your Pluto is going to show you how you look for power. What kind of power are you looking for? It's also going to show you how you exchange so that you're able to receive those sorts of power. Pluto is also a generational placement. So for people who have Pluto in Scorpio as that generation, that's an at-home placement. And that only happens like every 250-ish years. It's like 248 years is a whole entire Pluto cycle. So it's like 220. It takes about 20 years to go through each sign. Regardless of the nuances though, it's a while. So the fact that we're living in a time where there is a Pluto and Scorpio generation, I think is very interesting because that generation likes power for power's sake. They don't like power for purpose, which is more Pluto and Sagittarius. They don't like power for reciprocation and balance and justice. That's more Pluto and Libra. They don't like power for systems, hierarchy, and structures. That's Pluto and Capricorn. They like power for power. They want power for power. So check out your Pluto placement. Where it's at in the chart is going to show you like the house that it's in. That's the area where you need to be active and be aware of so that those exchanges can happen in a healthy way. Also, too, one of the things that we're not going to get too deep into because algorithms and all that good stuff, Pluto and Scorpio rule over our reproductive health. Okay, there's a reason that it has to do with the secret exchanges of other people. There are some exchanges in this world that we don't talk about and we don't want to talk about, and it's usually better that way, in my opinion, is better that way. So relating your reproductive health and that sort of lifestyle and how you practice that to those placements of Scorpio, Pluto, and Mars is going to be really helpful because the way that you're practicing in your life, it sounds kind of silly, but the way that you're practicing in your life, in the physical, and the patterns that you keep and how you do those, how you keep those practices in the physical world is going to teach you a lot about how you keep those magical standards and boundaries for you. Mars also has to do with boundaries. It is war related, and if there's boundaries are a part of a war battle strategy study. So keep that in mind for yourself. The other place to look at in your chart is going to be in your 8th house. The 8th house is the area where our exchanges happen. Now, I want to talk a little bit about the other structures, like the houses that come before that. The 6th house is Virgo. It's where we enter the underworld. Virgo, the story of Virgo is about Persephone going to the underworld and then having to be there for 6 months out of the year because she ate the pomegranate seeds, something so small, but it was a really big decision. And then having to come back up for another 6 months and then having to go back into the underworld for another 6 months and then having to come back up for another 6 months, and it goes on and on and on. So we bind up our contracts unknowingly a lot of the times with our body and the food that we eat and how we're sharing those sorts of communions with people. And that space, if you are learning the art of binding up contracts, what is done indirectly is just as important as what is being done directly. So paying attention to that space, the 6th house space is going to lead into also the 7th house space. 7th house is about our intimate mirrors, but it's also modernly ruled by Libra, and it has to do with the air that binds us. This is like word as bond. Here's my agreement. This is what I'm talking about. The 7th house is normally where like the contracts are getting drawn up. This is where we're talking about stuff. This is where we're negotiating. It's also Libra, the scales of balance. And so we're balancing, is this right? How does this feel for me? Is this equal? Is this worthy? Is what we are balancing here going to be able to be exchanged? That's another reason that it's the house of intimate partnership. It's because before you have intimate exchanges with a person, you have to balance, is this person worth me? Are they not worth me? How do I feel about that? You have to go through those sorts of layers. The 8th house, though, is where the exchanges actually happen. Those are where the exchanges are then given and received. So that's more of like astrologically, what are you looking for in your chart and what areas would you need to study? When it comes to binding up contracts specifically though, the reason that you would want to bind up a contract and the reason that I talk about it so much on my channels is because if you're looking for some sort of something in your practice, you want to start a new job, you want to have a relationship, you want to move across the country or to a new place, or you want to inherit a certain quality, you want to build a skill, okay? Anything that you would go to your practice for, cultivating relationships with spirits, gods, deities, okay? Cultivating a relationship with your ancestors, cultivating a relationship with you. There's so many different things that magic can be applied with, for, in. And if you're going to be asking for relationships in the spirit, if you're going to be asking for in your practice, if you're going to be asking for more of something in the physical, or more of something within your mind, or more of something within your heart, or more of something, if you're asking for something different or asking for something more, that you're looking for an exchange, you're looking for there to be some sort of inheritance. Please offer this to me, and here is this offering in return. I'll relate this a little bit more to the self, because with Scorpio season, the sun going through Scorpio, we also have the illumination on like our power and how are we powerful and what contracts have we signed within ourselves. So if you're looking at yourself, for example, I'll give you an example. Recently, probably in the previous like couple of months, I was going through a lot of trust issues. Like I was healing a lot of trust issues. There's a lot of people who betrayed me, and I was really working through a lot of just trust stuff on a lot of different levels, learning how to trust other people, learning how to trust myself. What does that even mean? What are my boundaries within that? And so I decided that I was going to bind it up in the physical as a sort of consecration, a finalization. And what do I mean by consecration, just for clarity's sake? When I say consecration, what I mean is that the spirit and the physical are now in unification. They are together. And so that spiritual, what's happening kind of beyond the veils that sometimes we don't always see the full picture of, is now brought into order in the physical. It has a set place, it has an order, it has a 1, 2, 3, 4 that goes with it. And it's also connected to the physical. It's not just in the heart, it's not just in the mind, it's not just out in the spirit anymore. It's now grounded here in the physical. So I bound up a work so that I was able to trust myself. And I didn't even realize when I started the work that that's what I was in need of. But I got about halfway through it, and I was like, wait a minute, this is what I need. This is why I'm doing this. Oh, okay, now I understand. And that's a lot too, for me and my magic, is so discern for yourself. A lot of the magic that I work is very just innate, like a child. That's when I started practicing magic, was when I was a kid. I didn't have books, I didn't have elders to teach me, I didn't have anything really, I just had myself. But my spirit knew. My spirit knew what to do. My spirit knew how to move. And if you're able to connect to that inner child, a lot of the times you just know. You just know what to do, you know how to move, you know where to be, you know who you are, you know what you want, you know who's safe and who's not safe. The wisdom of a child, like we're born with the ability to navigate a lot of the times in so many different areas too. The binding up of something, when you bind yourself to it, for me, the way I keep this order is that it was a consecration. Yes, the spirit and the physical were brought together. At the same time, it activated something to move forward. So in the physical, I was moving before that happened, before that work. In the physical, I was moving in a way where, in this example, I didn't necessarily trust myself or trust other people, and I was working through a bunch of trust issues. But in the spirit, I was learning lessons about trust. I had been learning lessons about trust for like years. Learning lessons about trust, and for some reason it started to surface from my subconscious, and it started to surface in my heart and my mind, and there needed to be a new start. And so I said, I see this in the spirit and I see this in the physical, and they don't line up with each other. Okay, well, now that I understand that, I need to have the exchange where I can sit in relationships and trust people, where I understand what are my boundaries around trust, where I understand, oh, I can trust myself and be able to depend on myself. And so when I brought that work together and I brought that consecration, activation, which can be done in so many different ways. You can do it by taking a bath, you can do it by lighting candles, connecting with the elements, going talking to the trees. Like there's so many different ways to have these consecrations. And that's part of the fun of magic, I think, is that you get to be creative. One of the things that has helped me with this is looking at the order of things and the symbols of things. And I'll probably do another video at some point on order. Order is like a really, really big part of my practice. And that's another thing I talk about pretty often within my channels that I haven't really expanded upon yet. So eventually, if you have questions about that, actually, that's true. If you have questions about order or what it means or how to practice it, please let me know. It's beautiful. Thanks for that. Yeah. Consecration. A consecration is also an activation. So those two things were floating separately in the physical and in the spirit places. And then I brought them together and I unified them. And I said to myself and to the spirits, because when I do that sort of work, I call the spirits through. Discernment for you, because that's a very serious thing to do. That's a very, 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 very serious thing to do. The spirits, whether that be your ancestors, the gods, the spirits of love, truth, and free, which normally that's what I sit with. So I'll call on those spirits, the great mother, the great father, the great beings, the great spirit. However, those are some examples. All right. Love ya. Those are some examples. Yeah. The great mothers and fathers of love, truth, and free. Another pronunciation that I sometimes sit with as well. And so in my discernment, you know, sometimes I will call on those spirits and call them through. If that works for you, beautiful. If not, do what you need to do. Sometimes it's healthier at the beginning as like a beginning practitioner to just call on the power of self and do it for you. Also true. So, you know, calling on the spirits, like I said, very serious thing to do. Have that consecration. So returning to that, the consecration is also an activation. So from then on, I'm asking for those to be unified and bound together as I walk forward in time from that moment onward. So now I sit in the responsibility because I've asked for that power. And this is more where the lesson of the blog that I've written today comes in. So if you want more details about that, go check it out. If you're asking for a power, you also have to understand once you receive that power, you have to sit in the responsibility of it. So I asked for the responsibility of trust, to trust myself, to be able to depend on myself, to be able to sit in that in the physical and in the spirit. I bound that up with a work, with a spell, with a consecration, put it together, activated it. And now I sit in the responsibility of walking in that unification onwards and forwards. So I have to continue to sit in the responsibility of the power that I've asked for. That's where power can get dangerous, and that's where magic can get kind of dangerous, is if you're asking for something and you haven't thought about the responsibility of it, you haven't thought about the consequences of it, you haven't thought about the order of the consecration that you're drawing up, the order of the spell. For me, in this example, a spell would technically be like you're sitting with your cauldron or your candles or like your tools. That for me is what I would also consider a consecration activation space. Beautiful, just for clarity's. It's not for every single person how that order would work, but for me and my magic, that's what I've seen, is that when I do consecrate something, it finalizes it, and it also starts a new chapter. So if you think about it too, like the example that's coming to my mind is like a marriage. Like you're not going to get married to somebody without thinking about the responsibility of what that relationship would really mean. You're not gonna become unified with another person. That's a really big responsibility. You're not gonna become unified with another person if you haven't thought about what your position is, what's their position, what power are you actually asking for within that relationship, what power are you receiving? Because sometimes the power we ask for is not the power that we receive. Sometimes personifying or like relating it to people and our human relationships can help me ground the understanding of magic. So if you needed more of like an example in the physical between human to human. Another example of this would be like, what contract are you in at your job? You know, like you do these responsibilities and receive this amount of money. How is your time bound up in that contract? Are you working part-time? How many hours a week is that? Are you expected on salary to be there like extra hours? Are you expected to travel and spend time traveling? Do you receive benefits at the end of the year? Like there's so many different ways that those sorts of contracts can be bound up. So definitely some things to look at in those contracts. Are you ready for the power and the responsibility of that power that you're asking for? Are you ready to open that new door? Because you will be walking into something new if you do bind that up. And are you going to be able to continue within that responsibility? Not just can you handle the responsibility, but can you also continue in that responsibility? And looking at yourself, are you willing to give? Are you willing to participate? What are you willing to give? And how are you willing to do that? That's like just a couple of examples, but it happens on a very day-to-day basis. You know, we bind up contracts on a daily basis. You know, what are you telling yourself when you look at yourself in the mirror? Like, that's a great example of a very simple contract. Every time I fill up my water bottle or wash my hands or interact with the water, I tell the water that I love the water. But that's another example of a contract, you know, because I sit with water in a very specific way. So to be able to do that, I love you. I love you, water. It seems really simple, really easy, but it's been a part of my practice for several years now. And it's been needed and necessary. Your pet, if you have a pet or a familiar, a follower, as I call them in my practice, they're little followers, you know, because it's not just, every follower is different. Sometimes the ravens, the birds are followers. Sometimes, you know, if you have relationships with the animals external to your house, I think more like we think of our pets as our familiars more so, but there's animal followers all over if you really have those relationships. But for example, with a cat, I have a cat. You see him in my videos every once in a while. He's great, dude. I love him. There's also a cost to having him around, which would be, you know, I gotta play with him. That takes time, which I love doing, but also it takes time. So because I love him, I'm gonna do it. I gotta clean up his litter box. Stinky gross, but if he's gonna be around, I gotta do it, you know? And taking care of him, grooming him, things like that. Like, cat, there's always a cost. There's always a cost, there's always a cost. And so just making sure that you have those costs defined in that contract. And sometimes understand that there's costs that you can't avoid. Sometimes you can negotiate the cost, but if you're really asking for a power that is a firm kind of power, you have a firm grasp on it, and you're like, yeah, that is really, really what I want. Maybe it's your dream coming true. That's gonna ask a lot of you. That's gonna ask a lot of you. As someone who has spent years building and creating that sort of space for myself, there's some things that cost a lot and they're supposed to. There's some things that cost a lot and they are meant to cost a lot, and there's no way to negotiate out of that price. Because if you were to negotiate out of that price, you wouldn't actually get what you were asking for. So before you open any sort of door or work or activation or spiritual consecration, just make sure that you're really sure about it. Make sure that you're really, really sure about it, because once you do it, you can't take it back. And I can't stress the importance of that. Once you do it, it's done. And we don't have the ability to turn back time. Thank goodness. That's a lot of responsibility, and I really don't want that. We can sit in our memories, we can look at the future, but we can't turn the clock back. So if you're gonna ask for something, or you're gonna make an offering, or you're asking for some sort of relationship in the spirit, just be really, really sure that you are sure, because if there's anything that you are, some things are not worth it. Some things are not worth it. If you're really wondering about this for yourself, because part of this is there's secrets. It's your secrets. The way that we bind up those contracts, no one really knows what's going on inside of us. No one really knows. And sometimes we don't even know until after the experience is over why we wanted what we wanted, or why we were going in that direction. It's further inspection, you know? So secrets exist for a reason. We're not always supposed to know. We're not always supposed to know. And sometimes it's not worth it. Sometimes it's not worth it. So just really, really make sure before you open a door or do work. So take your time and go and study those placements I mentioned earlier in the video: Scorpio placements, your Mars placement, 8th house placements, and your Pluto also. Really, if you want to learn how you bind up those contracts, really, really study those spaces. Another deeper layer, if you wanted to get even further into it, instead of just looking at those spaces as individual, how do they work together? How do they work together? Maybe your Mars and your Mercury are in the same sign, or like they're in the same sign together. And your Mercury, maybe you have Virgo or Gemini in the 8th house. Then you have Mercury ruling over that 8th house, and it's in the same position as your Mars. And so now you have one of those planetary rulers of Scorpio sitting with the ruler of the 8th house, which automatically gives you some sort of unification. which can be really beautiful to sit with. So if you are taking the time to learn how those spaces are, that's just an example, but if you're taking the time to learn how those spaces are interconnected, those spaces, places, and placements in Scorpio are interconnected, that's going to really show you like all the intricacies of your power within contractual exchanges and bindings, and what you need and how to protect yourself, because power for power's sake is a dangerous thing, and there's some people in the world that want power for power. And if someone sees a power in you that they want, that's part of Scorpio's story. If someone sees a power in you that they want that they don't already have and they can't have by themselves, or they can't have with what they already have, they have to have you for some reason, they have to have your power, then you have to know how to protect those placements. It's just like it's an essential part of that practice, is to be able to protect it and redirect people away from those spaces, being able to identify sort of predatory practices as well. Some people want to start practicing magic for power itself, or we come to magic so that we can learn about our power. We can learn about the power that is us. Magic can't offer you power that you don't already have. And a lot of the times this is where spells and bindings can like backfire or start to get really hard and really harsh, is because you are asking for something that either doesn't exist, can exist, or because of laws and structures, and there just hasn't been the understanding of that within you yet, and grace and patience, because sometimes that happens. Or you've come to, not you specifically, but just a person, because I've seen this happen, where there's a person who enters a spiritual space or a spiritual practice, and they're wrapping up bindings and asking for things and like these contractual exchanges just because they want to feel powerful. And that's really dangerous. That's really, really, really dangerous. More than likely, there's some sort of root within power of trauma, like maybe power was taken from that person, and so they're doing that so that they can feel powerful. But those are some pretty hard lessons to learn. And also at the same time, being able to identify that sort of person, especially if you're practicing any kind of cooperative magic, people who are going after power for power's sake, is normally because power has been taken from them somewhere and they haven't gone internally and worked through what really like the root of that. I don't want to call it a problem, but because trauma isn't a problem, it's a place where we're offered different kinds of power. I guess that's true. But they haven't gone to internally integrate that yet. And we're all humans. We all have things we need to integrate. Okay, we're all at different places and different spaces, and we all move at different paces. So be gentle, be kind, and be patient. Be gentle, be kind, be patient, and take your time. Take your time, especially if you're asking for, if you know you're powerful, or you're asking for a lot of power within your practice and you're calling on the spirits to do that, you're doing spell work, you're binding stuff up to do that. Once you do it, you can't take it back. So gratitude, reverence, and love to you. Keep doing what you need to do. Keep up your brew. And that's that. I don't know if there's anything else I need to say about it. I don't think so. Happy Scorpio season. May the power that you're asking for be offered to you in love, truth, and free, if that's what you need it to be. That's true. And thank you for supporting me. Thank you for being here. That's also true. Gratitude, reverence, and love to you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. Thank you, thank you, thank you. So good. Oh, one of the things, if you're still here, one of the things I forgot to mention earlier in the video is that I have a book coming out. So if you're interested in that, it's a book of spells, Poetry for the Warrior, which it comes out on Halloween. You can pre-order it with Barnes & Noble. I'll put the link down below, and more updates to come on the blog for that. So thanks for being here. Thanks for the support. Thanks to everyone who's already bought books from me. Thank you so much. And I'll talk to you next time. That's true.